What is your reaction to this declaration of a state of emergency in your state, Rivers State?
Thank you, Charles, for having me on. I'm really disappointed in the president's speech, but not totally surprised. Any person who has, followed developments in Rivers State over the past 1 year, probably knows that this didn't come as a surprise. Charles, much of last year, 2024, the NaijaNews group, have been working seriously, trying to destabilize the state, trying to create the exact conditions that will lead to a declaration of a state of emergency. As you probably know, Charles, even in October last year, I think specifically on the 7th of October 2024, those who were supporting the FCT minister, NaijaNews, burnt down 4 local government councils, during the elections, in Rivers State. And, it's very unfortunate that we've got to a point where even the president, has been sucked into this crisis. It's really disappointing. My own feeling, which reflects the broad spectrum of sentiments across the board, not just in Rivers State, but also in the Niger Delta area, is that the president himself is not a neutral party. As a matter of fact, you could argue that he's had his own fingerprints, written all over this crisis. You may remember that in December 2023, the president gave very humiliating conditions, during his, intervention in the crisis in December 2023. All of the 8 points, that constituted the so-called, mediation points, we are overwhelmingly against the governors Fubara. Not a single point was against the main orchestrator of this crisis, Mr. NaijaNews, who is the FCT minister. And now, this evening, we've had this broadcast throughout the length and breadth of the broadcast. Not a single mention was made, of the FCT minister, who is the main, actor orchestrating the crisis in the state, and he happens to be an appointee of the president. It's most unfortunate that the president has come across as an active, provider of the oxygen, to NaijaNews, who has now led the state into such a slippery slope, Charles.
So, as far as you're concerned, Dr. George, this comes across as if the president did not show balance and fairness. That's your assessment, because NaijaNews, of course, retains his power as minister, and Sim Fubara has temporarily lost his power as governor.
Yes, Charles, as I said, throughout the speech, not once did the president even as much as acknowledge the fact that, there is an instigator of this crisis who is his own political appointee, the FCT minister. Not once did the president mention this. The unfortunate impression, Charles, that the president has given is that he himself, has his fingerprints on this crisis, and that he's an active supporter of NaijaNews in this unfortunate crisis. And I believe that the president should have, been able to rise above this partisanship, and this evening proves that he didn't do that, and I think it's an unfortunate situation for the country.
And Dr. George, I have in front of me here, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that you served as NaijaNews' first Commissioner for Information and Communications when he was governor of Rivers State. In other words, people might see that and imagine that you would be more sympathetic to the Wike cause than I suspect you are. Is that right?
Yes, you're right that I served as Commissioner for Information in the Wike administration for nearly 2 years. But Charles, I resigned exactly because of his propensity for for crisis. You know, I joined the administration because I strongly believed that, you know, we had the mandate of the people to deliver service. But on all four critical, you know, metrics of development in education, because you need education to train manpower for sustainable development, we failed. For nearly 8 years, not a single teacher was employed. Teachers were not paid. We had chaos in the education sector. We had the highest number of children. Rivers State had the highest number of children out of school in the South. You know, because education was simply defunded. We also had very serious crisis in the health sector. As a matter of fact, my colleague who was the Commissioner for Health, who insisted that such a critical sector should not be you know, ignored, Dr. Dagme was sacked simply because he insisted and resisted the cynical neglect of the health sector. We also had very serious problems, you know, of lack of investment in agriculture, because we actually wanted to bring back food sustainability in the agricultural sector in Rivers State. Governor Wike didn't want to hear about all of these things. So, Charles, because I really wanted to make a difference, you know, as Commissioner for Information in the State Executive Council, and I saw that the governor didn't have commitment for development, I simply resigned, you know, from the administration. But there's something else, Charles. You know, Nyesom Wike, frankly, has, you know, a very strong propensity for violence, and I'm not a violent person. As you can see, you know, his rhetoric, his body language, you know, his overall tendencies towards chaos and towards complete dysfunction. And this was not something I was prepared to accept as a public official. So I resigned from the administration, and frankly, I feel sadly vindicated, you know, that this tendency has now dragged on to the national stage and has now put Rivers State in such an unfortunate situation, Charles.
Well, I mean, it certainly sounds like in a bare-knuckle fight, none of you would dare take on Mr. Wike. I mean, he clearly seems to be the one who has got the punch, as I say, the knockout punch, because that appears to be what has happened in Rivers State. I mean, what can Governor Fubara do now? I mean, is it all over but the shouting for him?
Well, the president has declared a state of emergency. I've received, you know, I've received video footage of military people already entering into the government house. So it's possible that the state of emergency is already in effect. The governor may have already left the government house as we speak, you know, from the footage of military personnel already getting into the government house. We will see you know, what happens in the next few hours and days. But I suspect that this is going to likely aggravate the situation on the ground in Rivers State, because Fubara had massive organic support of the Rivers people. He had very important, you know, political ideology that puts the Rivers people first. Charles, you know, one of the major, I should say, the actual difference he has with Nyesom Wike is that while Nyesom Wike wanted direct access to state resources, you know, in order to fund his political ambition, because he still has, I suppose, some presidential ambition, you know, Fubara wanted to use state resources, you know, for the benefit and development of the state, which is why, you know, rather than divert money to political godfathers, what he chose to do was to put the Rivers people and their needs first. For instance, for the first time since 1967, Fubara initiated, you know, to build over 20,000 housing units for low-income workers in Rivers State. This is the first and most extensive housing development effort since 1967. He's also, you know, recalibrating the educational sector. He has massive investment already. I think some Israeli companies were already beginning to revive the agricultural sector. He spent over 200 billion naira trying to open up the Trans-Kalabari corridor in order to expand development in the area. So this is a governor that already has a very clear developmental agenda that puts the Rivers people first. In Rivers State, we consider this as the saddest day, since the creation of the state in 1967, Charles.
Well, obviously, we are where we are, as they say. The president has declared a state of emergency. The question now is what the bottom line is how this issue is going to be resolved, because at some point it will need to be resolved. The governor has 6 months of suspension. Maybe if it's resolved quicker, he may well come back before then. But the assumption is that he will be back in the saddle in 6 months' time. How do you think it is likely to be resolved? Will it be political? Will it be legal? Do you see a hardening of positions as a result of this declaration of emergency?
Charles, I don't want to be pessimistic, but I very much doubt that this matter will be resolved, because it's a strong ideological struggle that this is about. The governor's agenda is very clear. He wants to defeat the specter of state capture represented by Nyesom Wike. He wants to make sure he puts the people first. And Nyesom Wike has a direct opposite ideology, which is personal aggrandizement and making sure state resources are back in his kitty so that he can pursue his own political agenda. So I don't think it's pessimistic, for me to suggest that I don't see any resolution to this, because Nyesom Wike is implacable. He's not going to accept any kind of leadership that he will not control, and I don't see how this can be resolved. And I think the president too has an interest in this conflict, if you want to be very blunt, Charles. As you know, the APC is having some problems in the north, in Kano, in Kaduna, and in Katsina, and elsewhere in the north, and there are very vocal voices that are also speaking up in the north against, the state of affairs in the country. So what I think the APC is doing is to pivot, to the south-south and to the southeast, to see how they can consolidate their ground, to serve as a counterpoint to what is likely unraveling in the north. So I do not, in the horizon, see how Rivers State is going to get back to normalcy, because frankly, this is not just about Nyesom Wike fighting Governor Fubara. I think that the APC, represented by the president, is very much in this fight, and I don't see how they can allow normalcy to return in Rivers State. It seems pessimistic, but that is a realistic assessment, Charles.